Because if it's obvious to me, like how obvious is it going to be to Pentagon generals who have very detailed, precise information about what's going on? And like they're patriots and THAADs and all these things. They were the world's most advanced weapon systems back in the early 1990s. But now it's 35 years later, and they can't stop Iranian missiles. They can't stop Yemeni missiles. They can't stop Russian missiles. Never mind these swarms of drones that are being developed at a very rapid pace. So you can't possibly stay rigidly entrenched in a Cold War mentality, and you can't be aware that you actually have no leg to stand on, which is why I try to always think, what are they really doing? And we see what they're saying for public consumption, but they can't not see what we're all seeing. And so this is why when in the second half of June, when there was this buildup to US attack on Iran, I thought, this is suicidal. This is completely idiotic. They can't do this because the upside was nothing. If you get lucky, maybe you regime change Iran, but it's a long shot. But you have a downside risk of the situation completely going out of control, of you losing 2 or 3 aircraft carrier strike groups and getting 20 of your bases in the Middle East wiped out and some 60,000 soldiers. So they can't possibly mean this. And so I said at the time, either there's going to be a no attack, or we're going to get like a telegraphed, prearranged attack like in the World Wrestling Federation style, when you make a big show of violence, but nothing actually happens. And then I said, we will know for sure only when the Iranians retaliate, because it's going to be a telegraphed fake retaliation. And that's exactly what happened. And so this is where like I'm looking at this war of words. I'm looking at everybody's trash talk, which you also get trash talk in World Wrestling Federation. And if you took it seriously, you would think, wow, these guys really hate each other and there's going to be a big fight here. But it's all for show. So it seems to me that the same thing is happening on the geopolitical arena. And the reason why it's happening is because there are very powerful political constituencies that need to be appeased. And rather than telling them, no, we're not going to attack Iran because that's stupid, they launch a fake attack and they call up Iranians and they say, look, we're terribly sorry, but we have to do this. We're going to drop a few bombs here and here. You have 2 days to, remove the crystal and the silverware so nothing gets damaged, but we have to do this anyway. And we understand that you're going to have to retaliate. So please be so kind to call us up first and tell us where exactly so that we can move our soldiers out of harm's way. And then we're going to both retreat. We're going to do some more trash talk. We're going to declare victory. And all of these Zionists and fanatics are going to we can put them to sleep. And then we're going to talk other things. So it seems to me that the real politics are more in this vein than they are in the vein of actual hostilities. But the groups who want the real actual hostilities, they're real and they're powerful. And they are lobbying relentlessly in Israel, in the United States, in Europe, in London, and so forth. And you have to dodge those bullets. And I think, unfortunately, Trump does blunder in important ways. Again, as we said, the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the cancellation of the INF treaty in 2019, those were terrible, unforgivable mistakes. But anyway, the world goes on, and hopefully, I have a friend who worked in Israeli intelligence, military intelligence, and their task was the security perimeter around Gaza. And this person told me on the same day that there is no way in the world that this could have happened without active cooperation of the Israeli security forces. So it was impossible. And then I looked on social media, and in the immediate aftermath of October 7th, there was a number of Israeli soldiers and veterans who posted videos on TikTok, on Facebook, on YouTube, and elsewhere, who said the same thing. And not only did they say the same thing, they provided very concrete reasons and explanations for why this couldn't have possibly happened the way it was described to us. So it was obviously a false flag attack orchestrated in order to get that war going. And now we know, because we have Israeli court records, that the Israeli patrols were called to stand down on 7th October. And I've been convinced since the October 7th that whole event was a false flag cooked up between Western intelligence with the Hamas elite sitting in luxury in Doha, Qatar, and Israeli intelligence. And the whole idea was to spark a regional war in the Middle East. That didn't get the World War II going. And so now, as that is failing as well, they're trying with Azerbaijan, they're trying with between India and Pakistan, now Cambodia and Thailand. Who knows, maybe they'll try the Koreas or wherever. These people are arsonists of peace. The more I study these conflicts, the more convinced I'm. The Balkans are going to be one of the crisis flashpoints if they can get a war going here. I'm becoming increasingly convinced that if you quarantined the British foreign policy establishment and their very extremely extensive network of non-government organizations and private contractors and diplomatic staff that are everywhere around the world and embedded in governments in these key flashpoints, that you would actually solve probably overnight greater than 90% of the whole world's problem. They are the arsonists of peace in the world. I think it's extremely difficult to judge what Trump has up his sleeve, because his habitual modus operandi is obfuscation and deception. And for as long as I've paid attention to Trump, it's been that way. He's saying something and then he does something else. I recognize that at this moment in time, probably most people are profoundly disappointed in Trump, and that the feeling that he's betrayed his voters and the MAGA base is widespread. But I'm not convinced that this is the reality of things, that nothing is what it seems. And so I would be very careful about judging Trump, because it is very hard for me to believe that he would now suddenly, after all this time of having a certain position and certain mission with his presidency, that he would suddenly pivot back to being the global hegemon and the enforcer of the global empire. I would be more open-minded with the idea that maybe, Trump being Trump, he's interested in putting the United States in the driver's seat of the global empire. Because let's face it, the British have been in the driver's seat. And now maybe he wants to take that position and impose himself as the dominant power in the world, and maybe dictate terms to Russia, China, Iran, India, and so forth. Or at the very least, approach all these negotiations and deals from the most powerful possible position. But the idea that he just went back to the same place where Joe Biden left off, that I don't believe. And so all this rhetoric might end up being what we got during his first term, when, remember, there was a war of words between him and Kim Jong-un. And there was a period of time where it seemed that the United States was going to go to war with North Korea, that they were going to bomb North Korea, but that didn't happen. Instead, at the very same time when he was engaged in that war of words, and it was usual Trump style, rash and vulgar and shooting nonsense off the hip through the social media. But at the same time, he said he sent a delegation of his representatives and military generals to South Korea and to China to prepare the ground to meet with Kim Jong-un. And then they held that meeting, and they had a good meeting, and they had a great relationship, and he was the first U.S. president to set foot into the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. And then we had the beginnings of peace emerge between the two Koreas. They started demining the demarcation lines. And I think that the main outcome of the trade deal with Europe, to which Ursula von der Leyen committed, is to strip the European Union of legitimacy and to show that the European Union cannot provide advantage and protection to individual sovereign national European economies. That was the idea, to combine in a bloc. You are supposed to become stronger. You're supposed to have a bigger, more powerful negotiating position. And I think that Trump just demonstrated that this was all a children's tale. And he absolutely humiliated Ursula von der Leyen. I don't even know how he was able to pull this off. She agreed to something she cannot even deliver. You're right to point out they don't have the money to do this. This was absolutely staggering. I wonder how he coerced her to agree to $750 billion in energy resources over 3 years. This is several-fold what the EU is importing from the United States at the moment. What are they going to do with all this? And that's at very high prices. And then 600 billion euros worth of dollars worth of investments in the United States. That already eats up most of the Rearm Europe program. They've already spent it practically. That whole thing, we're going to spread money to European contractors and we're going to grow European economy on the basis of rearmament push. They already spent this with Trump. And she agreed to something that she had no legitimate right to agree with, which strips the EU and its presidency and the European Commission of its legitimacy. And it makes it very obvious because now every individual European country will get to say, no, we do not accept this. And France, there's been very heavy criticism of this in France, in Hungary, in Germany. And I think that no amount of PR is going to make this okay. So I think that this will prove the moment when the EU ship struck the iceberg, to use the Titanic analogy. And so I think this is the important aspect of this deal, not because this deal will actually hold. It probably won't, but it'll be the apple of discord, which might ultimately lead the European Union to tear itself apart. And it might also prove the end of NATO because, what now? NATO is going to be arming itself with U.S. weapons, even though United States' commitment to NATO is on the wane. The whole thing doesn't make any sense anymore. And I think that what happened on Sunday in Scotland was the emperor has no clothes moment. But it is true that the United States has a very powerful economic dynamism. There's a very strong entrepreneurial culture in the United States. And if you give them the even terrain to compete, they will probably be successful. But then you're going to need to trade with other countries again. Then you're going to have to, if you're going to be an exporter again of manufactured goods, you're still going to have to make nice with China and with India and with Iran and Russia and Europe. I would give more importance to the recent statement by Nikolai Patrushev, who was asked recently about the provocations in the Baltic region, because this NATO general, this absolute ridiculous failure of a NATO general, Donahue, was talking about, we can push the Russians out of Kaliningrad. We can take control of Kaliningrad easily, quickly. Donahue has already proven his ability to fail with these cockamamie military operations, which he had a chance to prove himself in Ukraine, and he caused a complete and total disaster there. Anyway, Patrushev, back to Patrushev, because that's the point. Patrushev said that it's the British who are always behind these false flag attacks, and that they have centuries worth of experience in orchestrating false flag attacks exactly in order to pit powers one against the other so that they push them into war. And right now they are desperate to derail the relationship, a positive relationship between the United States and Russia.